Hey guys, Board now back with you for another television review, a new review, and on this video I'm returning to The Outsider, the new HBO miniseries based on the Stephen King novel from 2018. And this is going to be episode 6, and another intriguing title. The episode is called The One About the Yiddish Vampire, and that's sort of to do with the a flippant sort of sarcastic remark made by Glory's lawyer, the Maitland family lawyer, when he hears about Holly's conspiracy, well, not conspiracy theories, but her extreme theories to do with the supernatural and what's happening with the case. His sort of skeptical reaction to that, but it's a great little line. And before I start talking about the episode, it's actually worth saying there's a significant director for this one, and that is the horror director, Keira Salma, who I'm a big fan of. She's directed films like Jennifer Body, also The Invitation, very underrated film. Sort of more of a bizarre kind of psychological, like supernatural film with some fine performances. That can be found on Netflix in the UK, by the way, if you want to check it out. But that's a really good film. All set at this one dinner party with all these intriguing mysteries and stuff going on between the characters. And then just last year she directed the neo-noir Destroyer with Nicole Kidman in, and that was absolutely brilliant as well. A knockout film with some great style, and very powerful. Great performance from Kidman, and so she's really a director with a lot of credibility from my point of view, and very underrated director. So I was pleased to see her directing this episode, and she's very much in her element, as you'll see, because there are some big horror moments in this episode, and it just feels like the perfect sort of material for her to be directing on a television show. And I'll say as well, the episode is written by Jessie Nickson-Lopez, Jessie Nickson-Lopez, basically. So someone I haven't heard, but worth mentioning because a different writer this week, as well as Keira Salma making the guest appearances directing, and I think it's a big plus getting her on board because it's a really well directed episode. And the good news is that after last week's kind of disappointing episode, where it did feel like a little bit of a mid-season sort of slump, I think we're back on a roll this week. We're back on sort of top gear, and we not only get some meaty stuff once again, but it's just really effective in what it's doing. It's really atmospheric and chilling, and you can see all these different characters and story elements starting to click together. So that's very exciting to see. It's a very meaty episode, and one of the best so far. I think this is possibly the best since the opening two, and I mean it might even challenge those early episodes, but certainly the best one since the double pilot, I'd say. So that's really great to hear. And the fallout from last week is that Holly is travelling back to I'm not sure which city the drama's set in, but basically to the base to meet up with Ralph and the rest of them. Her kind of trip is over, and she has to take a bus in this episode, actually a coach, because she's been told no more trips on our dime, and she's had problems driving, and all this seems to be there seems to be a suggestion, at least, then this is linked to the supernatural and to do with her past, the issues she's had from her birth. So she's had to pay for like a coach overnight to get back for this important meeting with Ralph and with just everybody else involved, including Glory's like solicitor, lawyer. So and Jack's on board now because Ralph sort of invited him on board, or Jack insisted on getting him board last week, and Ralph agreed. And obviously we know there's some ulterior motives going on there, and the way Ralph is being controlled and manipulated, which is a big part of this episode. I think the last couple of weeks we've only got snippets of it, and just, yeah, well, he's acting weird and he's obviously being controlled, but it was very much on the fringes of things. We never got a clear sense of what was happening exactly, and we certainly get more of that this week. I think Jack and Holly, in a way, are the two characters that take the most like centre sort of. They take them on the most importance in this episode. So really interesting. But I think the character writing has been good in this series, and I think to see them start to come together, characters who have never been like seen together on screen, I think. And just to have their interactions and the tension growing in some cases is really impressive. So Holly, as I said, is travelling back overnight on the coach, and she's still in contact with Andy, who's the guy she's kind of casually seeing, the security guard. And last week, one sort of nice little touch was her leaving Andy the notes so that he could investigate on his own time. And so they're staying in touch, so they speak on the phone as she's travelling overnight on this coach. And she wants him to check the fingerprints from the crime scene to sort of see if there's a match. And he calls her back later and says, well, they're not a match, but he has found out that Taylor knew the twins who were killed. So that's maybe not a coincidence. And it leads to Holly having this theory later in the episode that Taylor was someone being used by the shapeshifter, by this entity, as like a slave, as someone to sort of do their calling, and as someone to kind of be like a smokescreen almost, someone to distract from the possibility that this is supernatural, and just someone to sort of sacrifice. That's part of Holly's theory. So that's one bit of information. But the first big horror moment we get in the episode is that on the bus, Holly suddenly like stands up to go to the toilet or something, and she's confronted with I think his name was Taylor, the guy from last week from the graveside, who was then killed at the end of the episode. He appears before her, and he becomes really aggressive towards her, and she just freaks out. It's a really kind of like surreal, terrifying sequence, and the bus just like skids across the road, and it's a big dramatic scene. The driver goes crazy at Holly because he says, you know, are you high or something, and she has to apologise, says, sorry, I just thought I saw something, but it's clearly haunting Holly, and this is important because it leads to her having this theory later on. And I'll continue with Holly's side of thing in a moment, because of course this episode does bring all the main characters together. That's part of the point, and I'll talk about what happens with her and Jack in this episode. Also, Janine is taking on greater importance ever since last week, Ralph's wife. So their side of the plot did take sort of focus last week with the whole hooded figure and the stuff with their dead son and him appearing to Ralph at the end of last week's episode. So Ralph is sort of putting two and two together with these two separate drawings, which he probably should have cottoned on to a bit sooner, but whatever. TV drama, all that have to string it out a bit. But he's got the two separate drawings that look very similar to each other with the hooded figure, and he shows them to Janine, and Janine again is really stressed about it. She really freaks out, is just concerned because that looks like the figure she saw, and she tries to convince Ralph again to drop this case about the warning, and Ralph doesn't tell her then he saw, their dead son in like a dream or an image. He's sort of keeping that bottled in, but he also is very dismissive. He sort of says, well, these two things could just be coincidence. In the case of, I think it's Jessa, the Glory's daughter, says, she's traumatized at the loss of her father, and she maybe that does affect her sort of like what she sees and her judgment. And he sort of tries to rationalize that these two separate drawings that happen to look like each other could be just a coincidence. And you sense maybe then he doesn't really believe that, because what's funny about Ralph in this episode is that he's very dismissive of these supernatural theories that are coming from Holly, and he's actually really hostile towards her, which I'll get to later. And when I was watching the episode, I was a bit suspect of this, well, surely there's been enough so far for Jack to at least consider the fact that there could be strange goings on and stuff. So him being so dismissive, I thought, was a little bit jarring. But then again, maybe it does make a sort of sense if you read it as him just being very nervous, very terrified. And I think maybe it goes back to him always being a very like rational, grounded sort of thinker, if you like. So almost the opposite of Holly. But it does make a little more sense now than I think of it, because I think it's just that he's sort of haunted and disturbed and terrified, and that makes him have this reaction where he doesn't want to face it, he doesn't want to believe it or live up to it. He just wants to keep thinking the rational explanation all the time, and we see more of this. Now, a moment I really like is actually when Janine sort of says to him, can I sit in on this meeting today? So she wants to be part of the discussion. So it's almost like she's been drawn into this case. She's now got this vested interest. And I think one thing I like about the episode is that it's drawing all these characters together, and it's sort of bringing together this sense of community. I think the fact then they would come together in this way, in this group, and have all these different minds, all these different personalities and ideas. And I mean, obviously Glory's lawyer has to be there. That's like a legal thing, because it's part of him representing them legally in this whole thing, and they obviously have a vested interest in getting to the bottom of the mystery with her late husband. But but yeah, I think that's quite an interesting little touch. The fact, just this sense of coming together and community, and this diverse group. I think it works really well for the drama. So Janine gets Ralph to agree to let her come to the meeting, and she also visits Glory because, again, Janine is haunted by what's going on, and she's starting to have all these theories that really she didn't have before. So she gets she gets Glory, because Glory trusts her more than she does Ralph, to let her talk to Jessa again, the child, the one who had these visions, the one who's seen the hooded figure, and she gets her to describe the figure again. The fact that it appeared to her twice, but it appeared differently both times. One time it was more blurred, and again that becomes important later in the episode. So at this point, Janine has got Glory on side, and Glory wants to come to the meeting, so she goes to the meeting as well, because she's talking about it with Janine, and that's going to lead to an interesting moment later on. So obviously Jack is still being controlled by the entity, whatever it is, shapeshifter, doppelganger, whatever you want to call it. He's still being manipulated. He's still in a bad way. And he meets Holly at the bus station when she arrives back in town, and it explains who he is and explains he's going to be in the meeting later, but says he just wanted to talk to her ahead of time. So they go for a coffee, and basically Jack is trying to dig for information because he knows this is why they're having the meeting, because of Holly coming back. She's been investigating stuff and she has this big theory. And this is another one of the best scenes of the episode, because there's just this weird sort of energy to it. It's a great sort of like interaction, character driven scene, but at the same time there's just this haunting energy to it. It's really simple sort of direction in a way, but really effective. So Jack tries to find out what Holly is going to say, and Holly, this is sort of brilliant, because she just reads him. She just knows that then there's something off about him, then he's got ulterior motives. And she says she'd rather not say till the meeting, and then says, if I can be honest with you, I think there's something dark inside you. I think you're troubled. And he then admits, which I don't think we've heard before, but says then his wife left him recently. And he actually covers it and says, but I've never felt better. So he tries to put this sort of macho type stance on it, which I think from what we know of Jack is quite typical. But I mean, who knows if it was really him? It could have been like the thing inside him. And then Holly says, well, to be honest with you, I'm just afraid no one is going to believe me tomorrow or today. It's later the same day. And then we get another really freaky scene when Jack goes to the bathroom and suddenly the thing's contacting him in this supernatural way. So blood appears on the bathroom wall, on the mirror actually, and it's in blood, and it says stop her. It's a message, stop her. So again, he's been sent to try and find out what she knows or what her theory is, and he returns, and then he's like, he's trying to find out why she thinks they won't believe her. So again, digging to try and find out what Holly is going to say, and she still sticks by her guns and says, no, I'd rather just say it at the meeting. And it's just it's another brilliant sort of character beat for Holly, because it just plays to her character. Then she has this intuition, really. She senses something's going on with Jack. And I think also it's just instinct. I think she finds it a bit off that he wants to meet her, just the two of them, ahead of the meeting, when the meeting's in a matter of hours anyway. And there's also this freaky moment where Jack is just like, he's just being controlled inside, you can see, and he's like really shaking and uneasy. And again, it's pretty powerful stuff. But I just love the fact that Holly reads him and knows that something isn't quite right. So in a way, that's kind of the plan adverted for the time being. So they go to the meeting, and you've got all these characters gathered. And again, this is brilliant direction by Keira Salma, because it's this great, focus sort of scene in the room, just camera sort of cutting back and forth between the characters, just capturing their reactions. It's just this really dramatic sort of tense scene, but very subtle direction. And Holly starts explaining this theory in detail, the theory about the shapeshifter, the theory about El Coco, this legend that has been passed down the decades, down the centuries probably, and just explaining that this entity is involved, and the whole theory, the whole thing we've seen so far since Holly came aboard. And this is great drama and great direction, because as I said, the camera is just capturing the perplexed expression on the rest of their face, and how gone out they're looking at her and going back and forth, and then Holly's reaction to their reaction. And I mean, what's interesting, I think this may be a slight misstep in the scene, is that Glory, the lawyer, steps in and says to her at one point, you don't have to listen to this, I mean, let's go. And Glory is very firm with him and says, no, I want to hear this. And then it's a bit surprising, because it's actually Glory, like a minute later, who just snaps at Holly. She's just like, you're supposed to be getting to the bottom of my husband's case and what happened, and you've been wasting our time on this like boogeyman sort of theory. And she's really hyper, really aggressive, and just storms out. I thought that played a bit over the top. I think it's maybe how the actress was directed, or kind of how she decided to play. It just felt a bit too over the top, although you could see what they were going for. But anyway, it's an impressive scene, and as I said, Glory then storms out. And this is when you start having this stuff with Holly and Ralph. And again, there's some good fallout from this scene, because you see the various characters like just talking about it, and obviously most of them are dismissing it. And I think again this comes back to the theme of this miniseries. This comes back to the sense that Holly is the true outsider, and that's what she feels like when Glory like has a rant at her and then storms out the room. And I think this is why the scene is so powerful, because Holly just feels isolated, left alone in this room. That sense of loneliness and emptiness, because no one believes her. Although Janine seems very much on board with her theory. And then we get the stuff with Ralph and Holly, and Ralph is very hostile towards Holly. says, I've seen people like you before, and it's just very demeaning of her. And this is where I thought maybe I didn't quite buy then he would be so dismissive. But I think it actually does maybe ring true because of what Ralph has been going through. But Holly obviously defends her theory and says, don't you think I know how people treat me, and do you think it's nice for me to be put through that, to be demeaned and torn apart? And I think you're totally sympathetic with Holly, and I mean, obviously, because we know she's right or she's onto something, then there is this supernatural thing. Then obviously that's easy. It's easy to take her side, but it's also, it does play into the theme of the show, her as this outsider, and she has this unique sort of side to her. And I think because it's a very like sort of Stephen King type idea, this sense of someone who's unique, someone who's different, and because of that they are portrayed as a freak. They're looked down upon by the rest of society. And so I think it becomes a really powerful thing in this episode. But anyway, what ends up happening is that Janine, because she has an interest in Holly and her theory, she actually invites her home, like, to stay with them, obviously while the case is going on. So Ralph, like, begrudgingly agrees, and they go and they stay with, Holly goes and stays with them. And that's when they start talking again. And Holly hears about Janine and what happened with her nightmare, her dream about the hooded figure, and she wants to explore more and wants to explore the table, and lo and behold, she finds the traces, the residue that we've seen in the previous episode, or a previous episode at the barn. And again, I like the kind of like clash between Holly and Ralph, because Holly is like, yeah, I think it's fair to assume that it's the same residue as was found at the barn, and Ralph sort of cuts her off and says, well, it's never safe to assume anything. We'll get that examined at the lab, so we'll get to the bottom of it. But Holly ends like that scene by suggesting then it's almost like a snake, the way it sort of sheds its skin, sort of thing. So that's her theory. So again, it's building quite nicely and coming together. But there's more with Jack, because later because he's obviously failed, he hasn't succeeded in stopping Holly and her theory. And so again, he's visited by the entity. He sees another message, stop her again. And then this is a really freaky moment. A freaky voice just comes to him. And it's almost sort of quite cartoonish and heightened, but considering it's supernatural, and when you see what it is, it's fine. But it's like, it calls him like Jackie Boy, which is quite sort of amusing. And he's freaked, and in the next instance, because it cuts between this and something that Glory's doing in the house, which I couldn't quite figure out. She's doing something with like papers, but it's cut between this and what's happening to Jack, and suddenly Jack is confronted by his mum, his dead mum, so in like spirit sort of form, and she's just so scary. She's like a scary version of Big Mo out of EastEnders, if anyone gets that reference. I know people in the UK will, but anyway, that's sort of what she looked a bit like. So his dead mum comes to visit him, and she kicks his ass basically. So the shapeshifter has sent his dead mother in spirit form to freak him out, to beat him up. I mean, we're not quite sure what else is happening. We're not. It just seems to be something quite psychological to really get under his skin and just manipulate him again. The fact that it is his dead mother, and just a way to punish him because she really beats him up. She really goes to town on him. There could be something more to it. I guess we all have to wait and see. But he wakes up the next morning all bruised and battered. And again, this unique direction where we see him in the morning and we see the blurry image of him, which is meant to be inside him. So that's where this idea comes back to play from Jessa, her description of the hooded figure, that it appeared to her twice, and once was more clearer, once was more blurry. So we almost see that represented inside Jack. And he calls Holly and he tries to win her over and says, I was upset by how you were treated by the others yesterday. And you should know I've got this evidence. And he tells her about, he tells Holly about when he visited the barn. And he says, I've got something to show you there. So the plan is to go to the barn. And she agrees to go. But again, I think you know that Holly is too smart to be taken in by this. But it's obviously another ploy from Jack and the Thing. And kind of his desperation is that amping up to try and nip this in the bud, if you like. And it's interesting because he drives over to Holly's and just says, I thought I'd pick you up, it's just easier. And Holly's getting in her car at the time and she says, if it's alright, I'll drive because I've had a bad experience recently with someone else driving, and at the moment I just don't trust anyone else driving. So that's another nice little character touch with Holly. And Jack, obviously, what's he gonna do? He has no choice but to go along with it. So there you have it. So they start driving. Holly's in the driver's seat, if you like, both literally and metaphorically. But she's obviously noticed that Jack is beat up, scarred, and it's a nice little cut actually, because when she looks at his bruises, Jack's like, you should have seen the other guy, and it quickly cuts to them in the car. So I like that, the way that was sort of handled, the way he his machismo, he just dismisses it with a joke, and then cuts to the car. But I mean, obviously Holly's wondering what has gone on and what exactly he's up to. So they're driving along in the car. And again, it's a really well directed scene. And Holly, I think there's just more talk back and forth about exactly what's going on and about the barn and just stuff like that. And Jack is directing her to the barn, says it's not much further. And again, we see the things stirring up inside Jack, him getting nervous. And Holly then says, I think it's better if you get rid of the makeup. So she actually gets some wipes out and rubs away the sort of makeup he has to cover up his scars. So that's an interesting little moment. But it's just a really moody, sinister, intense scene, because Jack has something planned. He has something in store for Holly, And I think just wondering, Holly knows, I think, has her suspicions, but what's she going to do exactly? How's this going to play out? And it's just this nice, simple little shot of them driving along the highway, this back and forth, and the sense that this is leading to something big. And the final shot of the episode, which is perfect, is just an overhead aerial shot of them, the car driving down the freeway. So a great last shot to end the episode. Brilliant direction throughout from Keira Salma. Very nicely done, and I'm into this stuff that's going on now with Jack and Holly. I think the only other small scene to mention is the small scene with the Paddy Considine character, the owner of the strip club, who's been in and out of it a little bit so far. And we see then he has been affected badly by the interaction with Terry from before when he was at the strip club, and that Terry, by touching him, has passed something on to him. And there's just this one scene in the club where I'm not sure of the character's name, but the Constantine owner of the just goes crazy, just gets really hyper aggressive and gets into a fight with this other guy, and he's pulled off. So you can see he's been affected somehow by the entity and by his interaction with Terry. So there you have it, just a small little bit there. But really good stuff. I think it's really picked the standard up again. Some really powerful scenes, some haunting moments, and some great character stuff. Holly, again, a really intriguing character. So, yeah, good stuff this week from The Outsider. I'm enjoying this very much. So that's my review of episode 6 it is. So let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you have any theories about what's happening with the show or what direction it might take. Have you been positive or negative on it so far? If you've read the book, let me know what your thoughts are comparing this to the book. And like and subscribe if you're new to the channel. You can also ring the bell on YouTube to get notifications for when my videos go up. And yeah, hit me up on Twitter, Letterboxd. I'll put the links in the description. But I'll be back next week around about the same time with my review of episode 7. So thanks for listening. See you guys again soon. Goodbye.